Hey everyone, Sarah here. I hope that you are enjoying your beautiful, beautiful day. It's bright and sunny outside here in Boston, but a little chilly and windy and blustery, but that's the perk about working from home is I don't actually have to go out there if I don't want to. But anyway, I wanted to hop on here because I had a friend ask me the other day. He sent me a private Facebook message, and I had a friend ask me the other day, he said, "How do you stay so positive?" He asked me that, and you know what? It hit me that he isn't actually the first or only person to ask me questions like that. I actually have a lot of messages in my inbox of people asking me like, "Hey, Sarah, how are you like smiling and how are you doing so well? You've been through a lot of shit and like you're so positive and you just seem to like really be doing great," and they want to know like my secrets. What are you doing? And so I figured, you know what? It's time to share my full story. And I just want to take a few minutes in this video to share with you my backstory on how I did become someone who lives such a stress-free, happy life, you know, even after dealing with trauma, and also someone who guides other people to get the very same results, making their lives more happy, more positive, and more authentic. So I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little nervous because this is actually my first time I've ever shared this story in its entirety. If you follow me on my personal page, then you've seen a lot of bits and pieces about my story. So some of this isn't a surprise to you, but I haven't shared the depths of it. And I know that I refrained from sharing the depths of my story out of fear. Fear of not really judgment, but fear of hurting other people's feelings that might stumble across this video or other posts. And you know what though? This is my story, this is my life, this is how I became who I am today, and it's worth sharing. And if I can inspire other people through this story, then that makes it worth it. So I'm gonna share you my little story about how I became a more positive, uplifting, happy person and why I do what I do, and guiding people to do the same. So in 2007, this is where it all began. In 2007, shortly after going to college at age 18, I fell in love. You know the story, you know the drill, it happens to all of us. I fell in love, but I fell in love with someone who was addicted to pain pills and heroin. And you know, I didn't know it at the time, he was studying business, he was charismatic, he was a talented musician, and he was really, really good at hiding his drug problem from the very beginning. You know, and I was young, I was naive, I fell in love super, super hard, and honestly, I had no idea what I was about to get into. If you've ever been in this situation, then you know. If you've never been in this situation, just know that I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. And it wasn't his fault. I don't blame him by any means. He was going through his own stuff. It just was a bad cocktail mix of emotion. But after a year and a half of intense fighting, and when I say intense, I mean intense fighting, emotional abuse, severe manipulation, I finally left. I left and I fell into a super, super deep depression. I thought that there was something wrong with me, right? I thought that there was something wrong with me. Like if I wasn't good enough to make him want to be with me over the drugs, then I must not be good enough for anyone, because I was there every day. I was there every day for him. And if I wasn't good enough, if I wasn't enough to make him want to stop, then I wasn't good enough for anyone. I must not have been pretty enough, sexy enough, smart enough, desirable enough, any of those things. I must not have been. I suffered from anxiety so much so to the point of panic attacks, depression, and honestly, there were many, many days that I couldn't even get out of bed. in college. You know, that college is supposed to be the time when you're having the time of your life, when you're having fun and dating, and I couldn't even get out of bed. And I hid this from all of my friends except my roommate, because there was no avoiding that. And I don't even know if she knew to the extent of how I felt. But there was always this gaping hole in my chest that I masked. I masked through partying, through binge drinking, through hooking up with any guy who made me feel wanted. And it was like I was in limbo. I felt like life would just be like this forever. And I didn't have any motivation to really get out of those cycles. And then in 2010, at age 21, I fell in love again. I fell in love again with someone who changed my entire life. He was goofy as hell. He was the most creative person I had ever met in my life. He was the most talented guitarist, self-taught guitarist and songwriter, and he was just different than all the other guys. He was so unique, so different, and so intriguing and mysterious. And he opened up the door for me to start asking the big questions. He opened up the door for me to start asking questions like, who am I? You know? Who am I? What's the purpose of this life? What's the purpose of this life? Is this really all there is, or is there something bigger? I started asking spiritual questions, like, if there were a God, how could there be so much pain in this world? You know, and the questions like, what happens after we die? And I started reading books. I started reading books by Eckhart Tolle, Ram Dass, and other spiritual gurus, personal development leaders on topics of living in the present, on living my divine truth. I finally started to see the light at the end of that super, super dark tunnel that I'd been in for the last 4 years. You know, having been just so downtrodden, and I didn't know who I was. This new person I fell in love started showing me the light. That's the best way to say it. And then I started to see the signs. I started to notice pain pills missing from an old bottle I had left over from a time I was sick. I started noticing lies and inconsistencies in his stories. And I realized that my fears weren't just paranoia based on the last drug addict I had fallen in love with. This was real. He was hiding addiction from me. And I was just completely devastated. I remember thinking, like, why the fuck does this keep happening to me? Why me? Why am I the one who comes from middle-class suburbia, no issues ever in our childhood, suddenly falling in love with these men who had such great, beautiful souls and hearts, but were so broken inside? Why was I getting wrapped up in this mix? And I could feel the anxiety just surging through my body. Just all my limiting beliefs, all of my fears, all of my darkness came rushing back in such a way that it even began to manifest as physical illness. I started getting migraines to the point of losing my vision, and I would get these weird muscle like spasms. I would double over from random flare-ups of inflammation, nerve pain. I mean, it was just like my whole world came crashing down all around me all over again. But the connection that we had was so magical. The connection that we had, despite all of the problems in our relationship, was so beautiful that I was determined to fix him. I was determined to save us. And I went on the most intense emotional roller coaster ride of my life over the next 2 years of our relationship. The highs were so high that we got engaged to be married, despite all of the problems. But the lows were so low that I just couldn't bear it anymore. So I made the most difficult decision I've ever had to make in my life, and I left him 3 months before we were planned to be married. Now, at that time, to mask my anxiety, my disappointment, my unhappiness, I stuffed my face with like huge family-sized boxes of Velveeta mac and cheese. This was before I was vegan. I binged shows on Netflix. I played video games for hours on end. I drank lots and lots of whiskey, and I jumped from one casual relationship to the next, all super exciting and super intense in the beginning. But then I would suddenly leave and end up right back where I started, alone, depressed, completely lost. And I didn't want this life for me. I did not want that. I wanted true joy. I wanted true happiness. I wanted to live a life free of anxiety, free of stress, free of all of this darkness. I wanted to know that I was good enough. Basically, I just wanted to know that I was good enough. I wanted to know that I was good enough, but I wanted to actually believe it too. And I wanted to know that I could love someone and actually be loved in return. And I wanted to feel like this life was worth living. Honestly, I really did. And I thought that by reading a bunch of self-help books like I'd been doing and watching all these motivational documentaries and speeches that I could actually heal myself, of all of my issues, and that I would wake up to my full potential. But all of this stuff really did was teach me coping mechanisms, which are fine, but doesn't provide true space for transformation. All it was doing was teaching me coping mechanisms and filling me up with empty positive affirmations. It was like I was trying to trick myself into happiness. And nothing was sustainable. I still had no clue who I was. I was still unhappy. I was still in my same cycles. True transformation just was not happening. I kind of felt like Scooby-Doo, like when he goes to run and his legs are just like, and his legs just keep spinning. Except he gains traction at some point and shoots off. I felt like I was just stuck right there. And that's when I'd heard about the Peace Corps, a U.S. governmental organization that sends volunteers to developing countries for 2 years, working alongside the locals for grassroots development. And I just had an urge to get the hell away. I had an urge to get as far from here as possible. And I wanted to help other people too. I wanted to feel connected to something bigger than myself, and I wanted to be alone with myself as well. So I realized that if I was going to break any toxic patterns, then I needed to interrupt the cycle. I needed to leave my comfort zone. I needed to gain a fresh and new perspective about myself, about the world. So I applied, I got accepted, I moved to Namibia, Africa to start my service, and I was all excited and happy. Now, when I got to my site in Namibia, I had this plan. I was gonna get happy. I was as far away from my problems as I could possibly get. Everything was gonna be cool. So I did a lot of yoga, like every single day. I thought that was the path to enlightenment. So I was doing a lot of yoga every single day. I was experimenting, cooking my own food. I practiced the mindfulness teachings that I had been learning. I kept reading my inspirational and philosophical books. And I really made connections with the villagers. I connected with the people that was working at my school, and I made a lot of friends, incredible friends. And then one night, after going out drinking and dancing with my friends, I found myself walking home with a friend of mine, local Namibian man, and we were surrounded suddenly by a group of young, drunk men. So, trigger warning, sexual assault coming, for those of you who might want to check out for a few minutes. But they knocked my friend out, they beat the shit out of me, and took turns raping me while one man held me down on the ground with his hand by my throat, cutting off all of my air supply. And there's a reason I'm telling you this in so much detail. But everything went in a slow motion, much like it does in the movies, when you hit that like climax point. I could no longer feel my body. I could only hear the sound of the sand and the dirt just moving underneath everyone's feet. I could hear, but I couldn't feel. I could hear the thud of each punch, you know, from them trying to keep me from frantically kicking my legs. My eyes burned from my own blood in my hair, my face. I could taste the iron in my mouth. I could smell the alcohol fuming from their pores. And in the midst of all of this chaos, I heard this voice, this really booming voice. It sounded like it came from everywhere, but it sounded like it came from nowhere. It sounded like it was something outside of me, like something you might call God, but it had my voice too. And it told me that I wasn't supposed to go like this, that I was supposed to help people. I was supposed to make a difference. I wasn't supposed to go like this. But I couldn't get enough air. I couldn't release myself from their grip. There were way too many of them. I was suffocating. So I surrendered. I gave up. I lost consciousness and just dissolved. And then I woke up. I woke up to my friends, two of my friends, yelling my name. They were pulling me up from the ground. They were putting my clothes back on. And I had blood everywhere. I was disoriented. They carried me to the hospital where I received treatment. And I remember when I was leaving the hospital, I felt so lucky to be alive. I felt so incredibly lucky to be alive. But I had this deep pit in my stomach of regret. I had realized that I had been living my life just wandering without direction, never quite getting to the depths of my potential, right? Like, I knew now, especially after hearing that voice, I knew now that I was supposed to make a difference, that I was supposed to help people. I was supposed to make this life worth living. But if I was going to make this life worth living, then I needed to cut out the bullshit. Plain and simple. I needed to cut out the bullshit, and I needed to get underneath the surface of the work that I'd been doing on myself, and I needed to go into the parts of me that I was too afraid to explore before. I needed to break away from everyone else's teachings about happiness being all rainbows and unicorns and puppy dogs because it clearly was not working for me. And as long as I kept settling, as long as I just kept coping, then that darkness, those same unhealthy patterns, those same toxic cycles would just follow me around like a cloud, just looming over my head all the time. And I knew that now. I finally knew that. So for the first time in my life, I built up the courage to face my own pain by walking into it, by just sitting in it, steeping in it, just being in it, and using it to my advantage. So the next 2 years of my life was spent rewiring old limiting habits into empowering action, which takes a lot of practice. It's not easy. And on top of the stuff that I'd already learned about presence and mindfulness and spirituality and all that great, beautiful stuff that was only working a little bit but not getting to the depths, on top of all of that, I learned how to use my shadow to my advantage. Now, the shadow is kind of like a rebellious teenager fighting for your attention, right? By acting up, and it doesn't calm down until you give it the attention that it's looking for. So I learned how to use my shadow to my advantage for deep healing. I learned how to use my negative self-talk, my judgments, my fear as a guide to the places that needed healing instead of running away from it with false positivity and like my fingers crossed that it's all just gonna be okay and work out. I learned to develop tools. I learned and developed tools to transform judgment and distress into light by leaning into it, working with it, not sweeping it under the rug out of shame for feeling these things. And then the 2 years after that, I continued my own healing journey because it's always a continued journey. But I was finally able to start helping people do the same thing that I did and continue doing the work that I continue to do, which is walking straight into that darkness with a flashlight and a peace offering. So now I have awakened to my wholeness. I can honestly say that I have awakened to my wholeness. I have accepted all of the parts of me, not just the cozy, lovable parts, but also the parts that everyone shames in the mainstream personal development and spiritual communities. What they shame, judgment, negativity, and fear, I embrace. I not only embrace it, but I use it. I use it to my advantage. And because I've learned to love all of the parts of me and work with my insecurities and my doubts and my fears and my anxieties, I have opened the door to a true life worth living. And it is full of purpose, it's full of clarity, it's exciting, it's authentic, and the journey just keeps unfolding more and more every single day. And I can't even explain how wonderful it is to be on this ride, this adventure. So, that's my story on how I'm so positive. The original question that my friend asked that I said in the beginning of this video. That's my answer. That's how I am so positive. Now, of course, there's more layers to this, and I'll be sharing that as we go, so stay tuned. But that is, in a nutshell, how I've healed from anxiety and depression, how I've come out on the other end. That's my story on how I'm able to live a stress-free and happy life. Now, don't get me wrong, shit still happens out of my control, occasionally, and anxiety pops up here and there. I'm only human, just like anybody else, but now I have the tools to use it to my advantage and find true healing, and that to me is ultimate liberation. That to me is amazing. It doesn't rule my life. It doesn't rule my life, and the beautiful thing is that now I can share my story and use my story and my expertise to help others heal and to live a stress-free and happy life too. And that's all that I could ever ask for. So, that felt good to get out. I can't believe I just shared it from beginning to end. If you came in on the middle of the video, I recommend rewinding it to the beginning once this is finished and posted, because it sets the stage and you get the full story that I haven't shared with people in its entirety. So thank you guys, seriously, from the bottom of my heart, for tuning into this. I see that you're on here, Courtney. Awesome. Thank you. Oh, you're amazing too. Thank you so much for your support, your encouragement. We're all in this together. Stay tuned. I'll be posting pretty much every day, zeroing in on different aspects of my healing journey and how I can help you do the exact same thing. So we're all in this together. That's pretty exciting. Stay tuned, guys. Have a beautiful, beautiful day.